The stars above the Cathari palace burned like cold fire, far away and unreachable. Princess Elira often sat by the tall crystal windows watching them, wondering what kind of worlds existed beyond her own. To the people of her empire, the stars meant power, conquest, and glory. To her, they meant escape. From the day she was born, Elira's life was different. Her body had not grown strong like the others of her kind. Her legs were thin and weak, her spine bent in ways that caused her pain, and her lungs struggled when the air grew thin in the high towers of the palace. The Cathari were a race of proud warriors, tall and strong, bred for combat and endurance. Strength was everything to them. Honor, beauty, and respect were all tied to physical power. But Elira had none of it. As a child, she had tried to run with her cousins in the gardens. They sprinted like lightning, their voices filled with laughter while she fell again and again into the soft grass, her legs giving out beneath her. At first, she thought they would help her. Instead, they only laughed. The Broken One, they called her. That name followed her wherever she went. The royal family gave her every luxury a princess could ask for. Jewels, dresses spun from silver threads, meals brought on golden plates, yet all of it felt like chains, glittering reminders that she was to be hidden away. Her parents loved her in their own distant way, but they never let her stand beside them at public ceremonies. They feared her presence would weaken the image of strength their empire was built upon, so they locked her away in beauty. Elira lived among gardens, books, and silent halls. She had servants to care for her, tutors to teach her, doctors to monitor her fragile health, but she had no friends, no equals. No one who dared to look into her eyes and see her as more than a fragile ornament of the throne. The palace itself seemed to mirror her loneliness. Its walls were tall and perfect, polished to gleam in the sunlight but cold. The halls echoed with silence except when filled with the sound of marching soldiers or the murmurs of nobles who passed by her, like she was invisible. She grew used to their stares, the mixture of pity and disgust. Some looked at her with sorrow, others with scorn, but none with simple kindness. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Elira often wheeled herself into the gardens. There, under the strange glowing plants of her world, she would lift her face to the sky and let her mind drift. The stars never mocked her. They never pitied her. They simply shone. And in their light she whispered her secret wish. Somewhere out there, someone must exist who would look at me as I truly am. But the years passed, and that wish remained unanswered. The empire itself did not help. The Cathari court was cruel to weakness. Nobles whispered that she should have never been born, that she was a burden to the throne. The worst of them spoke openly, calling her a stain on their warrior's bloodline. She learned to stay silent, to endure the sharp sting of their words like one endures cold rain. There were days she dreamed of leaving the palace, of walking among ordinary people, of finding a place where strength was not the only measure of worth. But even if she wanted to, her body would not allow her. The palace walls were both her prison and her shield. Yet despite the loneliness, Elira's heart was not empty. She longed deeply for connection. She longed for someone who would sit beside her without judgment. Someone who would not see her bent spine and weak legs as her whole identity. Someone who would hear her voice without thinking of pity. She had so much inside her, thoughts, dreams, stories, but no one who cared enough to listen. Her people believed she was cursed. She wondered sometimes if they were right. One evening, during the season of cold winds, she sat alone by the great reflecting pool in the palace gardens. The moonlight touched the water, making it glow like liquid silver. Elira leaned forward, staring at her reflection. Her face was delicate, her eyes large and bright, her long hair falling like a silver river over her shoulders. Many had told her she was beautiful, but the reflection she saw only reminded her of fragility. "You are broken," she whispered to herself, "and no one will ever see you as more." Her chest tightened, not just from her weak lungs but from the ache in her soul. The loneliness pressed in on her like the weight of the whole empire. For all her titles and riches, she felt smaller than anyone in the galaxy, and yet, she kept looking at the stars. The stars were her only companions, her silent witnesses. They reminded her that the universe was vast, that beyond her empire, beyond her world, there might be others who lived differently. She imagined planets where strength was not everything, where kindness mattered more. She imagined voices that would not mock her, hands that would not push her away. It was foolish, she told herself. Childish dreaming. And yet it kept her alive. That tiny flame of hope, that impossible belief that maybe, just maybe, her worth was not bound to her broken body. Her tutors often told her stories of other worlds, of other species. She listened with hungry ears, imagining herself among them. But when she asked if those people might accept someone like her, the tutors grew silent. One even shook his head sadly. "Weakness is weakness, no matter the world," he said. Those words cut deep. But even then she clung to her secret hope. Somewhere there had to be a soul different from the rest. Somewhere someone would look at her not as a burden or a shame, but simply as a Lyra, the princess of the Cathari Empire, the girl hidden in gardens, the girl who never fit her people's measure of worth, sat under the stars that night with tears in her eyes and hope in her heart. And far beyond those stars, destiny was already moving. A ship was coming, a ship carrying humans, and among them was one man whose eyes would see her not as broken, not as cursed, but as enough. But on that night, in her loneliness, Lyra could not know that the wish she whispered to the stars was finally about to be heard. The day the humans arrived, the palace of the Cathari Empire gleamed brighter than ever. Tall crystal towers reflected the morning sun, banners of gold and crimson waved in the high winds, and the royal court gathered in the Hall of Triumph. It was rare for the Empire to welcome visitors from distant worlds, but this meeting was different. Humans were still new to the galactic stage, and the Cathari wanted to see what these strange beings had to offer. Princess Lyra was not supposed to be present. As always, her parents insisted she remain in the quiet gardens where no foreign eyes could fall upon her weakness. Yet curiosity burned inside her. From the shadows of a high balcony, hidden by flowing curtains, she gazed down at the hall where the visitors were being introduced. The Cathari nobles stood tall and proud, their armor polished to mirror brightness. They looked like statues of war, perfect and flawless. Their voices rang with arrogance as they spoke of victories, of strength, of the Empire's glory. Lyra had heard it all before. What she had not seen before were the humans. They were smaller than her people, their bodies less imposing. They wore simple uniforms, not heavy armor, and yet there was something steady about them. They did not lower their eyes before the Cathari's pride. They stood as if they belonged there, as if they were not afraid. Among them was a man who caught her gaze without even knowing it. His name, she would soon learn, was Captain Elias Ward. He was not the tallest of the humans, nor the most decorated, but something about him was different. His movements were calm, his shoulders strong but unshowy, his face weathered by experience. His eyes, though, were the part that struck her most. They were steady, searching, and full of a quiet warmth she had never seen in the palace before. While the Cathari nobles boasted of their strength, Elias did not boast. He listened, he observed, and when his eyes wandered across the hall, they did not linger on the golden armor or jeweled crowns. They lifted, up toward the balcony where Lyra sat hidden. Her heart stopped. Most who saw her quickly turned away, uncomfortable with the sight of her thin frame, and bent back. Some looked too long with pity or disgust. She was used to both reactions. But this human, he simply looked at her. His expression did not twist with judgment. He did not avert his gaze. Instead, in that simple, quiet moment, he did something no one else had ever done. He smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a pitying smile, just a small, gentle curve of the lips, as if he were greeting her like any other soul in the room. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She pulled the curtain across her face, hiding quickly. Her hands trembled. Why had he looked at her that way? Why had his smile felt so normal, so real? Down below, the introductions continued. The Cathari Emperor spoke with booming pride, his voice echoing across the hall. "We are the strongest in the galaxy. We honor power above all else. Only the worthy survive in our empire." The human leader gave polite words of respect, but Elias remained quiet. Lyra, still hidden, found herself watching only him. She wanted to know why his gaze had lingered, why his smile had felt different. Later, when the hall emptied and the court dispersed, Lyra rolled her chair slowly through the quiet gardens, her mind restless. She told herself it was nothing, just a glance, just a smile, but deep down a small voice whispered it was more. That evening, as the sun set, fate gave her an answer. She had wheeled herself near the garden fountain, the one shaped like a great starbird, when she heard footsteps on the stone path. Thinking it was one of her servants, she did not look up at first. But the voice that spoke was not Cathari. It was human. "You look like you could use some fresh air," her head snapped up. Standing a few paces away was Captain Elias Ward. His hands were folded behind his back, his posture respectful but relaxed. He was not surrounded by guards, not led by officials. He had come here alone. For a moment, Illyra could not speak. No visitor had ever approached her so directly. Most did not even know she existed. She swallowed hard, her voice quiet. I am not what you think." Elias tilted his head, his eyes steady on hers. "And what do I think?" "That I am broken," she whispered, her chest aching as the familiar words left her lips. She had said them to herself so many times that they felt like truth. The human studied her, then slowly shook his head. "Funny, I don't see broken. I see someone alive, breathing, sitting under the stars. Where I come from, that's more than enough." His words fell like lightning into her heart. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever dismissed the idea of her being broken. Her people defined her by her weakness. The court judged her by her body. Even she believed it most days. But this human, this stranger from a distant world, spoke to her as if her worth was not in question at all. Illyra's eyes stung. She quickly looked away, afraid he would see the tears forming. You do not understand. My people, your people don't decide who you are." Elias interrupted softly. "You do," she froze. The garden was quiet around them. The only sound the trickling of the fountain. His words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. She wanted to reject them, to say he was wrong. But deep inside a flame sparked, a flame she had never felt before. Hope. For a long time she said nothing. Finally her voice came out as a whisper. Why would you speak to me this way?" Elias smiled again, that same calm smile she had seen in the hall. "Because you deserve it." And with that he turned his gaze to the stars above them, as if the moment needed no further explanation. Illyra sat in silence, her heart racing. She did not understand this human. She did not understand why his words felt like they had unlocked something long hidden inside her. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen not a curse, not a shame, not a burden, but simply Illyra. That night, when she finally returned to her chamber, she whispered to herself with trembling lips, "He did not see me as broken." And for the first time, she dared to believe it might be true. The days following the human delegation's arrival felt different for Princess Illyra. For the first time in her life, her thoughts were not filled only with loneliness or shame. They were filled with the memory of a man who had spoken to her as if she mattered. Elias Ward. The sound of his name echoed in her heart whenever she sat alone. His words replayed again and again. "I don't see broken. Where I come from, that's more than enough." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold those words tightly and never let them go. But her doubts were heavy, like chains around her spirit. Could one man's kindness undo years of rejection? Could his simple smile truly change the truth of what she was? The court soon gave her the answer, or tried to. It happened 3 days later during a formal banquet in the Hall of Triumph. The humans were invited to sit among the nobles, a rare honor. Long tables of crystal were filled with glowing dishes, golden wines, and shining ornaments. Music echoed from silver harps, and dancers performed in swirling robes of firelight. Illyra had not wanted to attend. She knew the whispers, the stares, the cruel laughter. But her mother insisted, saying it would show the Empire's generosity if all the royal children appeared. So she dressed in a flowing gown of pale blue, her silver hair braided with gems, and let her attendants wheel her chair into the hall. The moment she entered, the room shifted. Conversations hushed, eyes darted, whispers grew. Some nobles hid their smirks behind jeweled goblets. Others did not bother to hide them at all. "The broken princess," one voice murmured. "Why bring her here?" Another hissed. "She shames the throne." The words struck her like knives, though she kept her face calm. She had learned long ago to mask the pain. Then her gaze found Elias across the hall. He sat among his fellow humans, but his eyes lifted the moment she entered. No pity, no mockery, just recognition. He gave a small nod, like a quiet greeting only for her. Illyra felt her heart steady. She held her head higher, just enough to hide the trembling of her hands. The banquet continued with speeches and laughter. The nobles boasted of their power, their battles, their victories. They spoke of strength as if it were the only thing in the universe worth having. The humans listened politely, but Elias said little. He seemed more interested in watching the people than impressing them. It was during the meal that the cruelty came. One noble, Lord Veyron, a tall man with sharp eyes and sharper words, raised his goblet high. "To strength," he declared, "for only the strong are worthy of honor. The weak are nothing but shadows." His eyes slid deliberately to Aelira as he said it. The hall erupted in laughter. Aelira froze. Her chest tightened. She wanted to shrink into her chair, to disappear into the floor. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She was used to insults, but this one was spoken so openly, so loudly, that it pierced deeper than most. Before she could lower her gaze, Elias's voice cut through the hall. "That's strange," he said calmly, setting down his fork. "Where I come from, strength isn't measured by muscle or armor. It's measured by how you treat others." The hall went silent. All eyes turned to him. Some were shocked a human dared to speak against a Ketheri noble. Others looked furious. Lord Veyron sneered. "And what would you know of strength, little human?" Elias leaned back slightly, his expression calm, almost amused. "Enough to know that mocking someone weaker than you isn't strength. It's cowardice." A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. Elira's heart pounded. No one had ever spoken in her defense so boldly. She looked at Elias, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. Lord Veyron's face darkened. "You dare insult me?" Elias shrugged. "If the truth feels like an insult, maybe it says more about you than me." For a moment, the hall held its breath. Then slowly laughter rose, but not the cruel laughter from before. This time it was mixed with surprise, with curiosity. Some nobles chuckled at the boldness of the human. Others whispered that perhaps there was more to these strange newcomers than they thought. Aelira, for the first time in her life, felt something new in the hall of her people. Pride. Not in herself, at least not yet, but in the man who had refused to let her be humiliated. After the banquet ended, she wheeled herself quietly into the gardens, needing the cool air to steady her racing heart. The night sky was bright, the stars shining like scattered diamonds. She closed her eyes, her chest still trembling from the emotions of the evening. You shouldn't listen to them. Her eyes opened. Elias stood nearby, hands in his pockets, his expression soft. "You heard?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Every word," he said. "And I don't care what they think. What I care about is what you think." Her throat tightened. I am tired. Tired of being a shadow in my own home." Elias moved closer, crouching slightly so his eyes met hers. His voice was steady, warm, unshaken. "You're not a shadow, Aelira. You're a flame. Maybe they don't see it, but I do. And one flame can burn brighter than 1,000 cold stars." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She looked away, ashamed of her weakness, but Elias did not turn from her. He stayed steady as ever, his presence like a shield against the cold of her world. For years she had been silent, accepting the cruelty of her people. For years she had let their words define her, but in that moment, as the human's voice wrapped around her like light, she realized something she had never dared believe before. She was not worthless. She was not broken. She was seen. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to cry not from pain, but from the fragile, beautiful hope that perhaps she could be more. The banquet was only the beginning. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the palace like wildfire. The nobles could not stop talking about the human captain who had dared to speak against Lord Veyron. Some called Elias foolish. Some called him bold. Others laughed that he must have lost his mind to defend the broken princess. To Aelira, the words stung, but they also brought something new, a strange warmth in her chest. For years she had faced insults alone, her silence a shield. Now for the first time someone had stood beside her. Someone had raised his voice when hers failed. But the court was merciless. Whenever she appeared in public halls, the whispers grew sharper. "See how the human lingers near her. Perhaps he pities her. No, perhaps he is desperate for attention. Who else would waste time on her?" Aelira heard them all. Each word was like a thorn pressing deeper into her heart. And yet each time she thought she might break, she remembered Elias's calm eyes, his steady voice, his words, "You're not a shadow, you're a flame." It became her secret armor. One afternoon, she found herself in the garden again. The fountains sparkled and the air smelled of sweet blossoms. She thought she was alone until Elias appeared, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. "You look like you could use company," he said with a small smile. Aelira blinked at him, her lips trembling between gratitude and disbelief. Do you not care what they say about you? They laugh at you because of me. Elias handed her the cup and sat on the stone bench beside her chair. Let them laugh, he said simply. Their laughter doesn't change who I am, and it doesn't change who you are either. She stared at him, her heart aching with something she had no name for. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to live in the world he described, where cruel words had no power, but she had lived too long in chains of shame. They will never accept me, she whispered. Not as I am. Elias took a slow sip of his tea before answering. His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. Maybe not. But acceptance from them isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes one voice, one friendship is enough to change everything. His words sank deep into her soul. She lowered her eyes, gripping the warm cup tightly. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. He didn't promise to fix her, didn't pretend her pain was small, but he gave her something more precious, the belief that her worth existed even without their approval. That night, Alira looked at herself in the mirror differently. Her reflection still showed the bent spine, the weak body, the fragile frame, but for the first time she whispered a new truth. I am not only what they see. Still, the cruelty of others grew louder. At the next council meeting, nobles mocked Elias openly. The human wastes his time with her, one sneered. Perhaps he enjoys broken things. Another laughed. Their words were sharp enough to wound her again. Alira sat silently, her face calm, but inside her heart shook. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but the words lodged in her throat. Then Elias spoke. His voice carried across the chamber like steady thunder. Broken things, he repeated. Funny. Where I come from, broken things are repaired, cherished, valued. Sometimes the cracks make them even more beautiful. The nobles fell into silence, confused and unsettled by his strange perspective. Some rolled their eyes. Others muttered under their breath. But Alira's chest tightened with emotion. She bit her lip hard, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. Later, when the meeting ended, she found him in the hall. Why do you keep doing this? She asked softly. He looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Because you deserve better. Those words echoed inside her long after he left. She repeated them silently to herself again and again. You deserve better. For the first time, she began to question the beliefs she had been taught since birth. Maybe strength was not the only measure of worth. Maybe weakness did not mean worthlessness. Maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong to let her people's cruelty define her. And yet the fear remained. She still felt the weight of their stares, the sting of their words. Her heart was a battlefield, hope fighting against years of despair. One evening, unable to sleep, she went once again to the garden. The stars glowed above, bright and cold. She whispered to them as she always had, but this time her voice was different. Am I truly more than this? Can I really be more than what they say? She did not expect an answer. But then she heard footsteps, and Elias appeared once more as if the stars themselves had sent him. You are already more, he said, his voice steady in the night air. Alira turned, startled. How do you always know what to say? Elias smiled faintly. Because I don't see you the way they do. I see you as you are. Her throat tightened and tears filled her eyes. She did not look away this time. She let the tears fall, glistening in the starlight. For years she had believed she was cursed, unworthy, broken beyond repair. But now, with each word, with each moment, Elias was planting something inside her, something small but powerful. A seed of belief, a seed of strength. The cruelty of others had not stopped. Their laughter still followed her in the halls. Their whispers still clung to her name. But for the first time, Alira no longer felt completely alone. She had someone who stood beside her, someone who spoke when she could not. And deep within her heart, she felt the faint beginning of change. Perhaps the broken princess was not broken after all. The palace walls had always felt like a cage to Princess Alira. Every corridor whispered her shame. Every marble hall echoed with laughter that was never for her, but always about her. She had grown used to it, or at least she had told herself she had. But sometimes the cruel words slipped deeper than she could bear. It happened on a quiet evening. The moon hung high, casting silver light through the windows. Alira had gone to fetch a book from the library, her steps slow and careful as always. As she turned a corner, she heard voices ahead. Two palace guards leaned against the wall, speaking in low tones. They did not notice her at first. "Have you seen how the human captain follows her around?" One guard chuckled. "It's pathetic. He must be desperate for attention." The other laughed. "Or maybe he thinks he can rise in power by pitying her. Who else would waste time with the broken one? Even her own family hardly looks at her." Elira froze. Their words pierced her like knives. She stood hidden in the shadows, her breath trembling, her heart aching as though the wounds were fresh again. She had heard insults before, but tonight it cut deeper, because it wasn't only about her. It was about Elias, the one person who had shown her kindness. They mocked him because of her. She wanted to speak, to shout, but the words burned in her throat and refused to come out. Her hands trembled against her chest. And before the guards could notice her, she turned and hurried away, her eyes stinging with tears. That night, in the silence of her chamber, she broke. She pressed her face into her pillow, sobbing like a child. The pain she had carried for years spilled out all at once. Every cruel laugh, every mocking whisper, every glance of pity, she relived them all. She cried until her body ached, until her throat was raw. And when the tears slowed, another fear rose within her. What if they are right? What if Elias only stays because he pities me? What if I am nothing but a burden? The thought tore her apart. She wanted to believe in his words, in the way he looked at her as though she mattered, but the poison of doubt was strong. Unable to breathe in the heavy room, she left her chamber and went into the garden. The night was cool and the stars stretched wide above her, silent witnesses to her pain. She sank onto a stone bench and hid her face in her hands. That was how Elias found her. He had been walking the grounds as he often did, checking the guards and keeping watch. When he saw her sitting alone, shoulders shaking, he hurried to her side. "Elira," he said softly. "What's wrong?" She lifted her face and he saw the tears shining on her cheeks. His chest tightened at the sight. He sat beside her without hesitation, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me what happened." At first she could not speak. Her lips trembled, her throat closed, but his steady presence, his patient eyes gave her courage. "I heard them," she whispered. "The guards. They were mocking you. Mocking me. They said you stay with me only because of pity." Her voice broke and fresh tears spilled. "What if they're right? What if I'm nothing more than a weight on your shoulders? What if I ruin you too?" Elias's heart ached. He wanted to silence every cruel tongue in the palace, to shield her from every whisper, but he knew what mattered now was not the guards. It was the pain she carried inside. He reached out and gently took her trembling hand in his. "Look at me." Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her eyes. "I do not pity you," Elias said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who has survived every cruel word, every insult, every lonely day. You sit here now, breathing, living, even when the world tries to crush you. That is not weakness, Elira. That is strength." Her lips parted, but no words came. Elias continued, his voice strong and steady like a promise carved in stone. "If anyone mocks me for standing with you, let them. Their laughter does not matter. What matters is that I choose to be here. I choose to stand by you. And I will keep choosing it again and again." The tears blurred her vision, but this time they were not only from pain. Something warm spread through her chest, something she had not felt in years, hope. You truly mean that?" she whispered. Elias nodded without hesitation. "With all my heart." Elira could no longer hold back. She wept again, but these tears were different. She leaned forward, and Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. For a long time they stayed like that under the watchful stars, the silence broken only by the sound of her sobs fading into quiet breaths. When at last she pulled back, her eyes were red, but her heart felt lighter. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me, just believe me when I say this. You are not a burden. You never were." His words settled into her soul like light seeping through cracks. She had spent her life believing she was broken, but tonight, in the garden, she felt something change. She was still fragile, still wounded, but maybe, just maybe, she was not beyond healing. For the first time in years, Elira looked up at the stars not to beg for answers, but to whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude. The cruelty of others had not vanished. The whispers would still follow her in the halls, but now she had something stronger than their words. She had someone who saw her not as a shadow, not as a curse, but as a person worth standing beside, and in that truth, she found the beginning of her strength. The days after that night in the garden felt different for Princess Aelira. The cruel voices in the palace had not disappeared. The whispers still floated through the halls, and the mocking laughter still echoed in corners she could not escape. Yet something inside her had shifted. It was not a sudden transformation, not a magical cure. Her body was still frail, her legs still weak. Her scars had not faded, and her doubts still rose at times. But deep within there was a new ember of strength, small but steady. Elias's words had planted it there. You are not a burden. You never were. Every time her heart wavered, she remembered that, and slowly she began to rise. One morning the royal court gathered in the grand hall. Nobles in glittering robes filled the chamber, their voices buzzing like a swarm of insects. Aelira usually avoided such gatherings. She hated the stares, the fake smiles, the whispers behind jeweled fans. But today she chose to attend. When she entered, the room shifted. Heads turned. Eyes lingered on her cane, on her uneven steps. She felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Her old self would have lowered her gaze and hurried to a quiet corner. But today she lifted her chin. Elias walked behind her, not as a crutch but as a steady presence. His calm footsteps gave her courage. The nobles whispered, as always, "There she is, the broken one." Why does she bother showing her face? Look at the human, always at her side. How shameful. Their words hurt, but Aelira's heart did not crumble this time. She kept walking, each step slow yet deliberate. She moved to her seat near the dais and sat with grace, as though she were not the subject of scorn, but a princess who belonged there. Her father, the king, watched from his throne. His expression was unreadable, but for the first time, Aelira thought she saw a flicker of something other than disappointment, perhaps surprise. That evening, in the quiet of her chamber, Elias praised her. "You faced them," he said with a smile. "You held your head high. Do you know how powerful that is?" Aelira lowered her gaze, her lips curving into a small smile. "My legs trembled with every step." "That doesn't matter," Elias replied. "What matters is you kept walking." His words warmed her, but doubt still lingered. "They still hate me. They still laugh." Elias leaned closer, his voice firm. "Let them. Their laughter does not define you. What defines you is that you did not let it stop you. That is courage." Her chest tightened with emotion. Slowly, she began to believe him. The next weeks became a test of her spirit. She started appearing more often at meals, at court, even in the gardens where others could see her. She was not suddenly adored, far from it. The stares remained, the whispers never ceased. But with every day she grew less afraid. Sometimes she stumbled. Sometimes the pain in her body grew so sharp that tears blurred her vision. But each time Elias was there, steady and patient. He never carried her unless she asked. Instead, he gave her strength by letting her fight, step by step. One afternoon, when the court gathered for a public feast, a noblewoman sneered openly. "Does the princess think she inspires us, limping about like that? It is embarrassing." A hush fell across the hall. All eyes turned to Aelira. The old Aelira would have fled, but today she placed her trembling hands on the table, rose slowly, and faced the woman. "My body may be weak," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "But at least I stand without hiding behind cruelty." The hall went silent. No one expected her to answer. For years she had been silent, swallowing every insult. But now her words cut sharper than any sword. The noblewoman flushed and turned away, and though whispers filled the room again, there was something new in the air. Not just mockery, not just pity, but respect, fragile, faint, yet real. Elias watched with pride, his eyes shining. That night, Aelira sat in her chamber, her heart pounding. "I spoke back," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Elias grinned. "Yes, you did. And you were brilliant." She touched her chest, feeling the wild beat of her heart. It was terrifying. "Courage always is," Elias replied softly. "But you found your voice, Aelira. No one can take that from you now." Her eyes grew wet with tears, but this time they were not from pain. They were from the strange, growing feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was not as powerless as she had believed all her life. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the palace began to shift. Not completely. There were still those who mocked, still those who looked down on her. But others started to soften. A few servants smiled at her now, not with pity but with kindness. Some nobles lowered their heads in respect when she passed. It was not acceptance, not yet. But it was the beginning of change. And deep inside, Elira herself was changing too. She no longer dreamed only of hiding. She began to dream of standing tall, of proving that she was not broken but unbreakable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with fire, Elira stood with Elias in the palace gardens. "I feel something I have not felt in years," she whispered. Elias tilted his head. "And what is that?" "Hope," she said softly. The word trembled in the air like a fragile bird taking flight. Elias smiled, his hand brushing hers in a quiet gesture of comfort. "Then hold on to it," he said, "because hope is the beginning of everything." Elira looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she could not name. She had once thought herself unworthy of love, of respect, of belonging. But now, standing in the golden light of dusk, she dared to believe that perhaps she could find all three. The disabled princess who had been rejected by all was beginning to rise. And though the road ahead was long, she would not walk it alone. For by her side stood a human who had given her more than acceptance. He had given her strength. The great hall of the palace glittered with gold and light. Chandeliers swayed above and banners hung from the high walls, each bearing the royal crest. Tonight was a night of diplomacy. Delegates from many alien worlds had come to discuss alliances. The court was gathered in full, nobles and guards filling every seat. For most, it was a night of celebration. For Princess Elira, it was a test. She stood in the shadows near the entrance, her cane trembling in her hand. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might break free of her chest. Every instinct told her to turn and flee, to hide in her chamber where no one could see her weakness. But she remembered Elias's words. "You are not a burden." You never were. And she remembered the whispers of the nobles, the cruel laughter of the guards, the years of being rejected even by her own blood. This was her moment to prove to herself, to her family, and to the galaxy that she was not broken. Slowly, step by step, she entered the hall. The music faltered. Voices hushed. All eyes turned to her. The alien delegates studied her with curiosity. The nobles smirked, some even rolled their eyes. The king, her father, watched in silence from the throne. Every gaze felt like a blade against her skin. Her legs trembled, but she did not stop. Elias walked a pace behind her, his presence strong, steady, unshakable. She reached the center of the hall and stopped. Her cane clicked against the marble as she planted it firmly on the floor. For a moment, silence pressed down, thick and heavy, and then a noble laughed. "Why is she here? The broken princess wants to join our talks now." Snickers spread through the hall. Elira felt her chest tighten, her breath catching. For a heartbeat, the old fear threatened to drag her under. But then Elias's voice reached her, soft but firm, from behind. "Stand tall, Elira." She closed her eyes, gathered her breath, and let the strength in his words flow into her. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer just the rejected princess. She was something more. Her voice trembled at first, but it carried across the hall. "All my life," she began, "I have been called broken, weak, a burden." The hall fell silent. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. The delegates leaned forward with interest. I was told I had no place here, that I should hide my face, that I was unworthy of respect, and for years I believed it. I believed I was nothing. Her hand shook, but she held the cane steady. Her gaze swept the hall, meeting eyes that had mocked her for so long. "But weakness," she said, her voice growing stronger, "is not in the body. It is in the heart that gives up. And though my body may be frail, my heart has endured more than your scorn, more than your